Hello, it's Jim Manning. Today we're going to talk about the body of Jack Kennedy. Not the autopsy, but what happened to the body after he was assassinated. Now, what we know is that the body was rushed out of Dallas, out of the Parkland Hospital, and almost run over the doctor who was supposed to do the autopsy. And they had guns out, and they told him they were going to run over him. They knew that they had to get the body away from a competent coroner. Now, with that, they took the body in an ambulance over to a funeral home. And Aubrey Wright was one of the person handling the body. He has a story about how and why he was troubled. But what we know is that the body then was taken from the funeral home, and ostensibly the body was taken to the airport. It was put on Air Force One. And of course, everybody back then saw the Secret Service carrying the coffin up the back steps. I think at one point they showed two men carrying the coffin. Now, the coffin, according to the funeral home, weighed 400 pounds. And if Jack Kennedy was in it, add another 180. So it's approaching 600 pounds. And how could two guys be carrying a coffin of 600 pounds? That would be one thing you might want to question. But anyway, they had to knock off some handles on the coffin in order to get it in that back door. It's my contention that the body was not in that coffin. The body had been switched to another type of a coffin, which is the type of a coffin that people were being sent home from Vietnam in, and was more of a traveling kind of coffin. And his body was then put on either Air Force Two, which would have been Johnson's plane, or my personal choice would be the plane, the very large plane that carries the limousine, all of the vehicles for the Secret Service. And let me tell you why. First of all, Air Force One leaves first, gets in the air first. And then, as soon as it's in the air, what happens is they take all the other vehicles, the limo and all the other vehicles, and they run them around and they put them in the large plane. Then the large plane takes off. The large plane gets to the destination well before Air Force One. Why? Because now the plane, with all the units on it, gets there and unloads, and they have all the cars lined up so that when the plane pulls up, Air Force One pulls up, he comes down, he gets in the limousine. And so that plane had the body on it. Now, the body was being doctored by a man who had worked for the Central Intelligence Agency many times in situations where they had to change something on the body. He was pulled away from a funeral, put on a plane, that plane, along with all of the implements that he would need to work on Jack Kennedy, including probably the head of somebody, so that they had, if they had to replace the skull. When they got to Bethesda with the body, the news people were watching the coffin coming off the plane they had an elevator there to bring it down. We don't know where the two strong-arm guys that put it on were, so they had to have an elevator. Anyway, they brought it down. They put the casket in an ambulance, a naval ambulance, and Jackie and Robert Kennedy, who had been on the plane only when it landed, got into that ambulance along with Jack Kennedy's personal physician. They left with the body from Andrews Air Force Base, and they drove up and into Maryland to Bethesda Naval Hospital. They arrived at Bethesda Naval Hospital at roughly, but very closely, 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. They got out of the vehicle and were escorted by naval personnel into the building and taken up to a waiting area somewhere. The news people who were outside of the hotel, they saw that ambulance leave with the casket in it and go around to the back of the hotel to the morgue. That ambulance pulled up next to another ambulance. The other ambulance was exactly the same ambulance. This is where they messed up. They really messed up. Because all the news people saw that the body, that they got there at the hospital at 8 o'clock. Inside the hospital, down in the morgue, they had had the body since about 6:30, and certainly no later than 10 minutes to 7. Now, how is that possible? Well, I'll tell you how it's possible. They took the body off of the large plane when it got there. They put it in a helicopter, and the helicopter landed at Bethesda. And then they put it in an ambulance and drove it over to the morgue. And so that's how the body got there ahead of time. Now, there's other things that back that up, because they had called the captain of the guard at 2 o'clock and told him the body might be there at 4 o'clock. And so he was waiting for the body at 4. However, that didn't happen. But he knew that the body that he was sitting with at the morgue was there somewhere between 6:30 and 10 to 7. And so what was this new thing that was happening? And of course, this was in addition to the fact that he was already upset because he was asked 3 days before the assassination to have the honor guard prepare for a presidential funeral by his commanding officer. When it was found out that this had happened, the Central Intelligence Agency worked on it for a few hours, and they came up with a scenario that Herbert Hoover, I believe it was, had been sick, and that they thought he may be close to dying, which he did, but it was a year later. That's another example of how things that weren't planned properly, because now the body is not the body that was on the plane. There was no body on the plane. The last thing, of course, that happened was that the captain of the guard realized something was going on, and several days later, he fell dead of a heart attack. Remember the story about the heart attacks? Of a heart attack in the middle of a meal with his wife and children. 27 years old, in perfect condition. Now we get to what we believe happened on the plane, and that is that John Liggett had all the implements and everything that he needed, and he took a section of skull that was missing now, the parietal area of Jack Kennedy's skull, and he put another piece in, there. And so the doctors at Parkland, of course, all saw a hole big enough to put your fist in. And now they're looking at pictures in the news that's gone. And so they now know something's going on. Now, John Liggett, he was masterful, but he couldn't do a perfect job. He did a very good job of trying to cover up what they wanted to cover up. However, we're going to show you now a film that was on the men who killed Kennedy of John's wife, his stepdaughter, and a rendition of what was going on in the family at that same time. It will give you more than my estimation and conclusion. You watch it, see what you think, and we'll move on to the next one.
As the cover-up of Kennedy's murder slowly unravels and the true picture unfolds, new smoking guns are revealed. This is the Field of Honor in Restland Cemetery, Dallas, and the burial site of a professional mortician laid to rest here by his colleagues on February 17, 1974. This plaque marks the life of a mysterious man whose links to the Kennedy assassination are only just beginning to emerge. His name was John Liggett. He is remembered as a highly skilled embalmer by a former friend and co-worker, Charles Smith.
If he'd have to build a lip or a nose or build an eye orbit or an ear, he may work all night long doing the reconstructive work on someone that had been maybe shot in the face or automobile accident. He was the best. He would tell you he was the best. And when he finished it, he wanted the family to tell him he was the best.
Popular with his colleagues, he also had a secret life.
There'd be days when John would call and say, I need to miss tonight, or I'm not going to be there. Or this happened quite a bit, that we didn't know where John was, and I don't know that management knew where he was. He would just call in and say, I need off. Never discussed where he was, and we didn't ask. A lot of fellow workers would wonder, why can he be gone 2 or 3 weeks, come right back in so easy? And we felt like if we were gone for 2 or 3 weeks, so there's no use in coming back.
In a small town in Oklahoma, far from the rhythms of the big city, John Liggett is remembered by a former wife. Lois married him in Dallas after a whirlwind romance only 3 months before Kennedy's assassination.
John was a very charming person, and I found him to be very attentive and considerate and very, very sweet to me. I loved him. I fell in love with him.
John came into our lives less than a year after our own father, Charles Godwin, had been killed in a private plane crash. And John was not real welcome by my 2 older sisters and my brother and myself. We were a family. And he had a ready-made cover, and that's what I've always thought, is that we were a convenient cover for a man who needed that.
On the day of the assassination, John was with Lois at Restland, attending the funeral service of her late aunt. He was suddenly called from the graveside.
John went to the office and came back very shortly and explained to me that the President of the United States had been shot and that he was called to go to Parkland Hospital. I went home after the funeral, and it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and John called me from Parkland. I could hear the confusion in the background, and I asked him what was going on. He said, the president has died. And I said, well, did Restland get the job? And he said, no, some other funeral home got the job. But he said, I've got a lot of work to do. Don't try to call me. I'll call you as soon as I can. And it was about 24 hours before I heard from him. He came home and he walked in the door, and when I saw him, He physically looked like he had really been through a very traumatic experience. His clothes were disarrayed, and that was so out of character for him.
He was obviously tired, very exhausted, but agitated and hyped, and informed my mother that we would be leaving town, that we had to get out of town.
I said, "Where are we going?" And he said, "We're going to get out of town for a while until all of this blows over." And that was a quote, because I thought, well, what blows over?
A high-speed journey south took the perplexed family firstly to Austin and then San Antonio. John made brief stops en route to have huddled conversations with various contacts.
Throughout this journey, there were conversations that went on between John and his relatives and friends that I did not feel like I was privy to. That they knew something I didn't know, and I didn't understand what was going on.
In the early hours of Sunday morning, November 24th, the family finally checked into a motel near Corpus Christi. John had a further meeting, this time with his elder brother, Malcolm.
Here again, they had conversations that made me feel like I didn't belong, that they knew something I didn't know. I don't know why we were there, but it seemed to be very important to John that we were there.
I do recall that every time I would see John in the room there, he was seated on the end of the bed, watching the television, and very intently watching the news, and chain smoking, because he did chain smoke. And when John was nervous, he had a little bit of a nervous tick in his cheek, which I always knew that he was a little nervous there.
That's when he saw Oswald killed by Jack Ruby.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
The minute he saw that, he looked at me and said, "Everything's okay now," and you could just see his face. He was like all the pressure had been taken off of him.
All of a sudden he was like, sigh of relief, let's go, we can go home now. It was basically, pack your things, come on, we're leaving, now we can go.
We went back to Dallas, and everything went back to normal as everything could be under those conditions of the president's death.
But their lifestyle changed. After the assassination, John seemed to come into a lot of money. The family moved into a luxury home, and Liggett became a big-time gambler, hosting some of the wildest poker parties in Dallas.
The whole lifestyle from the moment John Kennedy was shot was just one chaotic thing after another. Either the police were involved in something he was doing, or his gambling was involved in something he was doing. It was just way over my head. The company he kept, the people, the pressure, it was just more than I could take.
There was an occasion that my sister, Benny, and my mother both recall of a visit from one of John's rather eccentric friends from New Orleans. And he was a rather freakish character, and my sister claims that we made merciless fun of him, the kids, my brother, my sisters, because he was rather odd with the painted-on eyebrows and the wig. He was a rather freakish man. John said to us that this was a friend of his from the Civil Air Patrol, that they had been in Civil Air Patrol together. And we believe this was David Ferry.
David Ferry was a prime suspect in the 1967 Garrison investigation into Kennedy's assassination. He was found dead in his New Orleans apartment before he could be interrogated.
I really believe that John Liggett was somehow involved in the John F. Kennedy assassination. I think his role was to do something with the body. To the body, how alter it, fix it, I have no idea. Now, he may have even gone with it to Bethesda. He had plenty of time to do that. I think his job was to do something with that body of John F. Kennedy.
Liggett's lifestyle led Lois to divorce him in 1966. They both remarried but remained close. In 1974, out of the blue, Liggett was arrested for attempted murder. This Dallas home was the scene of a vicious crime. Dorothy Peck, a friend of John Liggett's, suffered horrendous injuries and was left for dead, but survived to identify Liggett as her assailant. The police were swiftly linking him with other brutal killings in the Dallas area. He was imprisoned in the county jail, but the police were not allowed to interrogate him. John had been held on remand for almost a year when his brother Malcolm insisted on meeting Lois in a park in Austin.
He was very secretive about this meeting, and he wanted to walk. He wouldn't talk to me in my car. And he told me at that time not to have any further contact with John, that it would be in my best interest not to. In fact, he said, if you care anything at all about your children or yourself, you will not see him or correspond with him anymore. And I think that Malcolm felt that if I talked to John, John would tell me something that either Malcolm or someone Malcolm knows didn't want John to tell me. And I really believed that. I was so frightened by this action that I moved to Lubbock, Texas. And a few weeks later, I had a phone call from a friend there who told me that John had been shot in the back and was dead.
On the morning of February the 14th, 1975, Liggett was being transferred with other prisoners from the courthouse in downtown Dallas to the nearby county jail. The police vehicle had entered the garage when Liggett, using a hidden key, slipped out of his handcuffs and made a bid for freedom. A single shot in the back, fired by a sheriff's deputy, killed him instantly.
I feel like Malcolm knew that there was something that was going to happen. I feel that he knew more than he was saying to me. And it frightened me, for myself and for my children.
But the mysteries do not end with Liggett's death. In 1992, Deborah, for the first time, met Leona, John's wife at the time he died. Although reluctant to talk, Leona recounted a visit to Restland to view Liggett's body prior to burial.
She came out from East Texas to Dallas, and she was shocked and surprised because to her, this was not John. It wasn't John there. She said that the person that was in the casket that she was shown had a mustache, and this to her was also an indication this was not John, and I too would have to think not, because John never, as long as I'd known him for the many years, could even grow a mustache. I did get the distinct impression that Leona was very nervous, even at that time in 1992, to speak with me about the details of John's death and her suspicions that it was not John that was buried there, and probably rightly so. I think I would be very nervous to know that as well, and I think I am.
John's brother Malcolm handled the funeral that took place 3 days after the shooting. John's former colleague Charles Smith was there.
There's no doubt the person that we handled the funeral for, the person that we embalmed, the person that I helped dress and we put in a casket and handled the funeral service for, that was John Melvin Liggett. That was a John Liggett that we knew for several years prior to this incident happening.
But the story does not end there. After his divorce from Lois, John worked in Las Vegas for 3 years as a dealer. He had close contacts there. Recently, Lois was on vacation in Vegas with her grandchildren. when she had the most extraordinary experience.
We were in a casino, and I saw someone that looked exactly like John Liggett. And he turned around and looked at me and heard me call one of my grandchildren's names. And when I did, he looked at her, and he looked back toward one of the people that worked with him, turning his back to me, and said something to him about me because he pointed back of himself toward me. But we didn't stay around to find out if that was John or not. I was pretty shaken by it. I really felt like from the back of his head, and when he turned around and faced me, I thought it was John Liggett. So it wouldn't surprise me a bit in the world if he were in Vegas. In fact, that's the most logical place I can think of that he would be.
Lois and Deborah's suspicions about John Liggett's ties to the assassination are reinforced by a photograph that has emerged in recent times. It was taken at Jack Ruby's Dallas nightclub, The Carousel, prior to the assassination and Ruby's shooting of Oswald.
Obviously, one would recognize Jack Ruby. Immediately to his right is John Liggett's brother, Malcolm Liggett. His wife, Suzanne, the blonde, to his right. We met her several occasions that she was at our home. The last I recall seeing Malcolm Liggett was at my mother's residence in Dallas, and this was at the time that John was still in jail in Dallas. The woman with the dark hair and the black dress in the center of the photograph is Iris Campbell. Not at the time of this photograph, but years later my mother met Iris when they were living in West Texas out in Lubbock. My mother was a member of the Episcopal Church, St. Paul's there in Lubbock, and Iris came in one day and had expressed an interest in becoming an Episcopalian and joining the church. And she and my mother became very dear friends, and later also became my daughter's godmother. For a few years there, she was in and out, in close contact with my mother, came and visited frequently, and then disappeared, basically just disappeared. And I've not seen Iris Campbell, and neither has my mother, for many, many years. She just kind of faded out. Prior to seeing this photograph, I was unaware of any connection between the people that I do know and Jack Ruby. And it does put them in context then as acquaintances of Jack Ruby's.
I really think that maybe John had something to do with government business. I really believe his death had something to do with the John F. Kennedy connection. What exactly, I don't know, but I believe it.
Now that you've seen it, you might want to watch it a time or two so you'll remember it. But I think it's very believable. These people have no reason to make these statements. There wouldn't be anything for, but it fits right in with what I think happened.